Today we're going to be demonstrating some of the capabilities of IT Foundation Management to simplify the IT operations environment. In this case, we're going to be focusing on the IT Operations Foundation, and we're going to be specifically optimizing and automating process. To make sure we all understand what the IT Foundation is, the Foundation really consists of all of the hardware and much of the software that we rely on to run our business on a daily basis. To further help, we note that it's supported by systems administrators, DBAs, SANS administrators, network administrators, and so forth. IT Foundation Management provides a unified way for privileged actors to perform their work over privileged interfaces in a highly optimized way, and that's the scenario we're going to demonstrate today as one of those capabilities. So what we're really looking at today is simplification example focusing on reducing complexity. So here's an example of what it takes to connect real devices in the IT infrastructure without IT Foundation Management. But once IT Foundation Management is brought in, all we need to know is the name of the asset we want to connect to. In our demonstration today, we're going to be connecting to a SAN, a network switch, and a blade chassis. The information that we need to have to be able to connect to these devices, we either get because we already know that information because we've done this before. We get it from a configuration database. We get it from some other experienced professional in the organization. Some of it we can actually go and find in the infrastructure by tracing down wires, which obviously takes a lot of time. But just to get a perspective on this, this is the kind of things we really need to have to be able to make these connections. So we need to know what is the CLI connected to, what port is the SAN hooked up to on the terminal server, how is the terminal server set up to accept connections, what's the IP address, what command is issued to connect to the port. That's what we need for the SAN. For the network switch, we need to know what's the IP address, how is it set up for connections, what's the username, and what's the password. For the blade chassis, how is the chassis set up to allow connections, what's the URL, what's the username, what's the password, and then in the menu system, where do we go to connect to the console. So this gives us a really good understanding of just how much information is actually required to access the devices in our IT infrastructure. Now we'll go on to the live demo.
Right now I'm going to demonstrate how to connect to a SAN via normal connection methods. I'm going to use SSH and connect to the terminal server that I've gone and traced the command line access port of the SAN to. So I can SSH. I'm going to use PKI, and I've had to track down the right people to find what the right key is and get a copy of that key. And I'm going to connect to the terminal server that the SAN is connected to. I needed to know what the username and IP address for that terminal server was. So all of this bits of information I've had to track down, and that's taken me quite a bit of time to do. Now, once I'm connected to the terminal server, I've also had to figure out how to connect to the port that the SAN is on. And once again, I've had to dig through some documentation for this particular Lightwave terminal server to figure out how exactly to connect to that port. And so that also took me a long time. So I will issue the command to connect to the port that it's hooked up to. And here I go. I'm entering interactive mode, and if I do a show version, I'll see that I'm on the SAN, and there are my two SAN controllers. This all looks pretty easy, but every command I've typed in there has required quite a bit of research to get those commands and those access files.
And now, John, is it correct that each time you want to come back to this device, you have to know that same information without making a mistake in any of the commands you're putting in?
Absolutely, yep. I mean, I'm either going to have to remember these commands, and if I don't do it often, it's going to be difficult to do. I'm going to have to document it somewhere, and then there's a matter of being able to find the documentation, or I'll have to hunt down this information once again. Now I'm going to demonstrate connecting to our network switch. In order to do that, we're going to use PuTTY, so I've obviously had to have this program installed on my computer in order to run and connect to it. Open up that, and I need to know what the IP address of the switch is, and I need to know that it's Telnet protocol that we're looking for. We can Telnet to this switch. So once again, need to know the program, need to know IP address, port number, telnet, the connection type. So I know all that. Click enter, and it says enter key to continue. Now it's asking me for a username. I need to know what the username and password is, and once again I've had to go hunt down people in order to get this information. Here's my version connected to the network switch, but all of this information I've had to have hunted down and known, and it's taken me quite a bit of time. For the last connection in our demo, I'm going to connect to a blade in a blade chassis. Some information I need to know about this is the URL to connect to, and the fact that I need to use a browser to connect to the blade server. So I've entered in the URL, it's loading here. As you can tell, I also need to have a username and password set up. I've had to contact the administrator and get that set up, so that's taken me quite a while to do as well. Provide my username and password, and it's now going to log me in to the OA of the blade server. Here we go.
So now in this case you couldn't have used PuTTY or the command line interface that we used first off to get to here, is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
So I also have to know where to go in the menu system in order to get to the connection for the console. And so I've driven down here in the menu system, and I've opened things up, and here you can see got a login for the console, and I'm connected to the device.
So you actually had to go through an administrative front end before you could even get to the console in this case.
That's correct, and needed to have access credentials to get to that front end, needed to know what the IP address is, needed to know to use the browser, and had to obviously hunt down the people to get the access credentials set up. So quite a bit involved in doing that.
Okay, so we've looked at some fairly complex scenarios. Can you show us how it changes when we go to ConsoleWorks now, John?
Certainly. With ConsoleWorks, it's very simple to connect to each of those devices, as I'll demonstrate now. All we have to do is look at our consoles, figure out what we want to connect to. Let's go ahead and connect to the SAN. Select the device, click on Connect, and here we see that we have our SAN connection. Once again, I'm issuing the same commands, showing the version of the controllers and a little help there. So we're connected to the SAN.
So all the things that you had to do before, you didn't have to do this time.
All I have to do is select the device I want to connect to, click the Connect button, and it immediately takes me to the device. Here I am connected to the switch. Do a show version on the switch, and I can see that I've got my software load for the switch version. And if I want to connect to the blade that I connected to, I can just select the blade, click the Connect button, and I'm taken to the blade. There's my login prompt for the operating system.
So what we've really demonstrated here, John, is that we did have to have the information that we used the first time in the first part of this demo to get to these different things when we set up ConsoleWorks. So we had to have that information one time, but the whole idea is don't make people perform repetitive actions. Make it simple. Enter it once, use it forever.
Exactly, and ConsoleWorks will keep all that information in one place, keep it secure. Obviously, it protects the information such that you have to have rights granted to your ConsoleWorks login in order to access that device, and in fact you need usernames and secure passwords in order to get into ConsoleWorks itself. So not just anyone has those rights to access the devices, but those people that do have the rights just need to select the device, click Connect, and they're there.
And besides simplifying the work that people do at the foundation of the IT infrastructure, this also really increases agility, doesn't it? Because can't a systems administrator move from one area to another far easier than they could otherwise?
Oh, certainly, because all of your devices are at your fingertips, one click away, nice GUI, easy presentation, log files that are kept. They can bam, 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 connect to the device. They don't have to worry about any of the access methodologies and remembering that and hunting down the right people and talking to the right people who are at lunch, and any of that information is all kept in one place securely, and ConsoleWorks will arbitrate who gets access to it, and the administrator that needs access to it can perform perform his job without having to worry about the mundane, repetitive information that normally gets in the way of him doing his job.
Well, very good. So we've demonstrated again another scenario around simplification with ConsoleWorks. I think that ends our demonstration for today.
Thank you, Terry.
Thanks, John.